This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories. Taking the oath of office. After months of wrangling and debate, Sudan's Sovereign Council has finally been sworn in.
The government is the most important thing. I have a lot to ask for. A lot. We need justice. It's the basis of everything, of development and prosperity.
Kismayo's airport and seaport are closed in Somalia's Jubaland ahead of tomorrow's crucial election. Officials say it's to prevent any interference. Also in the program, fighting for the flag of free speech. South Africa's Equality Court restricts public displays of its apartheid-era flag, ruling that Grachitua's use amounts to hate speech. And in sports, football's world governing body FIFA installed a new committee to run the game in Egypt after the sudden resignation of the previous board. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. After weeks of delays, negotiations and setbacks, a sovereign council has finally been sworn in Sudan. It comes after a long-term president, Omar al-Bashir, was removed from power by the military in April after months of protests. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, a former military chief, will lead the Sovereign Council for the next 21 months. It's now the highest authority in the country, but the executive powers will be largely delegated to the cabinet ministers. BBC's Sally Nabil followed the day's events.
Members of the Sovereign Council have been sworn in the presidential palace behind me. This council is going to run the country during a 3-year transitional period. It's made up of 11 members, 5 military men and 6 civilians, including 2 women. One of them is Christian, and this choice is quite significant. Christians have complained about persecution under former President Omar al-Bashir, and perhaps the Sovereign Council wants to send a message of reassurance for the Christian community in Sudan. Some people are unhappy about the fact that members of the army are part of the Sovereign Council, but the military members have made it repeatedly clear they are going to stick to all the political agreements that have been signed with the opposition coalition.
I am concerned about the presence of the military, but I'm still optimistic. We have so many demands. The former regime left us without proper education or a healthcare system or any programs to take care of the youth.
The government is the most important thing. I have a lot to ask for. A lot. We need justice. It's the basis of everything, of development and prosperity.
Within a few days, we expect Sudan to have a civilian cabinet, and people are pinning a lot of hope on this coming government. They wanted to put the country back on track. Sudan suffers from poverty, high inflation rates, poor infrastructure, but the people here are very much looking forward to starting a new chapter in the history of their country.
Well, let's bring in Ahmed Soliman, a research fellow in the African program at Chatham House here in London. Thanks for taking time to talk to us on the program. So it took us a long time to get here. So is it all systems go now, would you say?
Well, we hope so. What we're saying and what you showed in your broadcast there is that we're now waiting for the executive to be sworn in. So we've had the Sovereign Council, which will be the representative body, the high authority. Now we need to have the policy makers in, those who are going to take charge and implement policy in the country moving forward. So we're waiting to see the Prime Minister, Abdallah Hamdok, be sworn in today, hopefully this evening, and then him to make his cabinet selections over the next week or so.
Is it a big challenge for him?
It's a huge job. I mean, Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok is a prominent economist, has worked with the UN system for many years, and he's been selected for this task. I mean, the key challenge here, amongst others, is to get Sudan's economy back up and running. It's been deeply mismanaged over 30 years by the President Bashir's deep state, and they need to disentangle that. That will take a long time.
Is it really easy to maintain, power-sharing governments or power-sharing institutions without a guarantor?
I I think on the African continent, we've seen examples where this has been extremely difficult, including in Kenya and Zimbabwe and elsewhere. I think what you have here are different layers. You have the Sovereign Council, you have the executive, which is supposed to be tasked as a technocratic government with implementing policy, and you have the legislative, the parliament. This should be an oversight mechanism, check and balance, if you will. So that you do have some layers there, but I do envisage that there will be disagreements.
So where do they go? On whose table do they, come and sort their issues out? Is it the African Union? Is it international players? Who can help be a guarantor for this peace agreement, or this agreement, really?
You have, I think, domestically, the Sovereign Council, so you have a body comprised of 6 civilians and 5 military. So they are the first, I think, point of call for the disagreement. Of course, you have regional community. The African Union has been extremely involved in negotiating the peace settlement, including the negotiator Labat and the Ethiopian mediator as well, Mohamed Darir. So they will also, I think, have a role continue to play. And then the wider international community, including Western partners in the Middle East as well.
I'm wondering, though, what these other important constituencies, the Darfur, South Kordofans, the ones who rejected this agreement, whether that's important and whether anything might come out of this?
I think it's important to say it's not the peoples of those parts of Sudan that have rejected the agreement, but it's definitely imperative amongst the challenges for the government to reach a comprehensive peace settlement that includes those groups that stand outside of the agreement at the moment. This will be one of the big key tasks in the first part of the transitional period. And I think there's already been efforts made towards that, but it is reflected in the constitutional agreement, but it needs to be built upon and worked on.
All right, Ahmed Soliman, thank you for taking time to talk to us on the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, the administration in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, has drafted a new law that it hopes will discourage begging and prostitution. It's estimated that more than 50,000 people live on the streets of Addis, most of whom are under the age of 18. The BBC's Kalkidan Yibeltau has this report.
As Ethiopia's main city, Addis Ababa attracts young people from across the country looking for better opportunities, but many of them end up living on the streets. Some turn to begging to survive, while many young girls have no option other than prostitution. The new draft bill is designed to clean up the city by discouraging begging and banning sex workers soliciting on the streets. Some former prostitutes, like Haymanut, who has worked on the streets of Addis Ababa for 9 years, are cautiously optimistic.
I'm happy about the plan. Since I spent many years living that life, I was glad when I heard about the ban. But the government needs to address some things. First, these girls need support, and the government needs to help provide it. They also need education, finance, opportunities, and a place to work, because it's very difficult to move away from that life.
The proposed bill will make it illegal for sex workers to stand on the streets and look for clients. And people giving money to street beggars, not the beggars themselves, are the ones who will get in trouble with the authorities.
There's a tendency to take begging as a culture. The city administration has set up its own social trust fund and is trying to offer rehabilitation and solutions, especially to street dwellers. The ban on street begging is part of his move to make people living on the streets productive citizens.
This is Addis Ababa's main red light district. The new draft bill, if approved, could transform the sort of business that's done around here. City authorities say they have set up a charity pool to which people can donate to help support those that are disadvantaged in society rather than giving out money individually. They also say the prevalence of street prostitution is bad for the city's image. Critics, however, fear that the move could give the police unrestrained power over those who are the most vulnerable.
There are going to be problems with the police. There have already been conflicts between the police and street workers. They get beaten up, detained, and held naked in the cold. This is what life is like for them. Many of them have addictions too. They get hooked on things to help them beat the cold. They have children and families and other expenses.
The bill comes following raids on shisha smoking bars and a ban on motorcycles that was later amended, both moves again designed to clean up crime in the city. According to officials, discussions are being held with various segments of society, and once that's done, it will be tabled to the city council, where it's expected to approve into law. Kalkidan Ibeltal, BBC News, Addis Ababa.
Let's now take a quick look at other stories making headlines across Africa. Nigeria has declared that it has been free of endemic wild polio for the past 3 years. Health officials say its progress in the fighting the disease could result in the whole of Africa being declared polio-free by next year. The disease remains endemic in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Malawi's President Peter Mutharika has vowed to deploy military to all borders and airports to prevent any disruptions by demonstrators who are planning mass rallies across the country. Opposition and civil society groups have announced they will be holding massive protests from Monday next week. The country's constitutional court is currently hearing a case brought by the opposition to have results from May's election annulled. Now, a key election is set to take place on Thursday in the regional state of Jubaland in Somalia, and it holds the elections at the regional authority working alongside the Kenyan troops have closed off Kismayo Airport and seaport ahead of that vote. Now, the poll has regional implications, with Ethiopia backing the UN and federal government who want the vote postponed. The regional authorities backed by Kenya want them to go ahead. Both Kenya and Ethiopia have significant numbers of peacekeepers in Somalia. And it's Kenya that backed Ahmed Mohamed Islam, also known as Madobe, when his militia took control of Kismayo back in 2012. He was then declared interim leader before being elected in 2015. It's thought Madobe will retain power, but there are 5 other candidates contesting the election. The vote's legitimacy has been undermined by parallel voting lists from the opposition and the electoral body, and a ban on several candidates. Jubaland's stability is seen as crucial in the war against Al-Shabaab. So an attack on the 12th of July on one of the most heavily protected areas of Kismayo has raised fears of their resurgence in the region. Well, the BBC's Bashkash Yugsadai has been following the events unfolding surrounding the elections. Help us understand, really, what the regional implications of these elections are.
Yeah, the regional expectation on this election is very, very important, particularly to the 2 neighboring countries, that is Ethiopia and on the other side, Kenya, because Kenya has, security concerns, because Kenya borders Jubaland, and also it has a large number of military personnel and several camps within Jubaland. For that reason, Kenya has an important interest on security. On the other side, Ethiopia has an economical interest, because you know that in Kismayo there is a port which the Ethiopians want to use that port, because the Ethiopian, as we know, it's a landlord country. Currently it is using other countries, so it's going to be very important for them economically. For those 2 reasons, it is actually a very, very important election on this region.
So we have 3 official candidates vying for that seat. Whoever wins, does it impact seriously on the security of that region?
Yeah, it depends on who you ask. If you ask the Kenyans who have been staying with the current president, then it matters to them, because they know how to deal with the current president. But if a new person comes in, then that will be a new start for them. So for that reason, Kenya would like to keep the current president to be going on, because they know that they have been dealing with him for the last 7 years, and they understand him. And not to forget that Kenya has received several attacks from the Al-Shabaab, who are actually in large number in Jubaland, and for that reason, Kenya will like to keep Ahmed Madobe. On the other side, Ethiopian and the federal government of Somalia will like to have a new person, because on the one side, the Somali government is going to have an election next year, and the current president is organizing himself to have all the regions of Somalia under his control, so that he can get vote from those particular areas, mainly, Jubaland.
All right, Bashkas Juksadai, thank you. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Is still to come. Nigeria's men's basketball team departs for the World Cup in China despite reports of a lack of funding. I'm Sophie Ikenya, and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The top stories on this program. After months of wrangling and debate, the 11 members of Sudan's Sovereign Council have finally taken the oath of office. Security forces in Kismayo are blocking entry to the southern Somali city ahead of crucial elections in Jubaland, which take place on Thursday. You're watching Focus on Africa. Time now to find out what's happening in the world of sport, Peter.
Many thanks, Sophie. Football's world governing body, FIFA, has installed a new committee to run the game in Egypt after the sudden resignation of the previous board. Failure at the just concluded Africa Cup of Nations, which it hosted, led to the resignation of the board. There were also lots of previous problems as well. A row over Amir Waders excluded from the team and then returned. Problems over preparations for the 2018 World Cup and a highly publicized row with Mohamed Salah over image rights. And then there's the confusion over the local league as well. Our reporter, Sarah Moshen, has more.
With Egyptian football in chaos following the sudden departure of the national federation's leadership, FIFA appointed on Tuesday a committee to take over. The Normalization Committee of the Egyptian Football Association is composed of Chairman Amr El Ganaini, Deputy Chairman Gamal Ali, and the other three members, Sahar Abdel Haq, Mohamed Fadl, who was the AFCON's director in Egypt, and also Ahmed Abdallah. They are responsible to run the EFA daily affairs till 31 of July 2020, and as they will also act as an electoral committee, none of the members will be able to stand for the elections under any circumstances. And though they have started working immediately, but the 5 members will still have to pass a FIFA background check. Also, the chairman said that their first mission is to modify the regulations of the Football Association and also to choose a coach for the Egyptian national team. We know that the previous board was criticized over their poor performance. Even again 2 days ago, Liverpool star Mohamed Salah said that there was a very poor performance and there was no discipline or privacy for the Egyptian squad during the African Cup of Nations.
Now, Nigerian champions Eyimba have been ordered to play their CAF Champions League preliminary round tie behind closed doors over stadium concerns. Last year, Kara Brazzaville of Congo complained about the floodlights at the stadium during a CAF Confederation game at the venue. Eyimba are looking to come back from a 1-0 away loss to Burkina Faso's Rahimo on Sunday at their home arena in Aba in southeast Nigeria. CAF is due to launch another inspection of the stadium following the match. Uganda's Farouk Mir has signed for Turkish club Konyaspor from Croatia's HNK Gorsia on a 3-year deal. The 21-year-old attacking midfielder played in all 4 of Uganda's games at the recent Africa Cup of Nations in Egypt. He scored 5 goals in 30 appearances for Gorica last season. An Algerian striker, Islam Slimani, has joined Monaco on a loan until the end of the season. The 31-year-old striker signed for Leicester City from Sporting Lisbon in 2016. He scored 13 goals in 46 matches for the Foxes. Over the last 2 seasons, he spent time at Newcastle and Fenerbahce in Turkey on loan. Nigeria's men's basketball team has departed for this year's World Cup in China, which starts at the end of this month. Earlier this week, there were reports that the team might not travel due to a lack of funds. But in a press release, the team's general manager, Musa Adamu, said they had been able to get a loan to fund their trip. The Tigers are grouped alongside Russia, Argentina and Korea. And despite all their problems, team captain Ike Diogu says they are ready.
The players are taking it upon themselves to be prepared. We push each other. Obviously, you know, sometimes we don't have all the same resources that some of the other countries do. But, you know, we're playing for one common goal, which is the country. And so we put everything else aside, all the other things that might frustrate us. And we are fully committed to, you know, doing well at the World Championships.
Sophie, that's your sports.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Now, South Africa's Equality Court has restricted the display of the country's old apartheid-era flag, ruling that its use amounts to hate speech and racial discrimination. The flag behind me was South Africa's official flag until 1994, when the white minority regime collapsed and multi-party democracy began. Now, this has been the symbol that South Africa has carried around the world since then, and the judge's comments explained why. He said people who display the old flag choose oppression over liberation. They display the old flag gratuitously, demeans and dehumanizes on the basis of race. Any gratuitous display of the old flag demonstrates a clear intention to be hurtful, harmful, and incites harm, promotes and incites hatred against black people in terms of the Equality Act. Well, Selo Hatang is the chief executive of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. They brought the case to court. Thanks for taking time to talk to us on the program. There are those who argue that this decision infringes on the rights of people. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's important that we go back to what the judge said. The judge said these protections that he was invoking never existed when it comes to being hurtful as this flag is judged to be. So the protections that you enjoy, that you can still use the flag for artistic purposes, for when you want to do it in a scholarly format, etc. So it's not a total ban of the flag. So as a result, we're keen to then emphasize that this is for ensuring that those who still feel the pinch of oppression as a result of this kind of this gratuitous display of the flag also have rights that they can.
I am curious, though, about a private display of this flag. Can the South African judiciary really monitor what goes on behind closed doors?
No, and I don't think that's the intention. That's why the judge said that there should be two things that should happen following this. His concluding remarks were that the Nelson Mandela Foundation, together with those that oppose this application, must then work together to ensure that those who do not understand why this flag is problematic can then begin the process of understanding that. And that's why even in a context where it's in a home, if a domestic worker is in this home and they find that they find it offensive, it's to protect those kind of people to be able to then can lodge a complaint in this regard. So I don't think it's for us to then say this is a total ban that includes people's private spaces, except where it interacts with those that do not actually want to see it.
I'm curious about the kind of steps that you have already taken, or the government really has already taken, to try and include other people to understand why this move has been taken.
Well, the judgment was just passed today, and over the past 2 months, what we've been trying to do is make sure that people understand why we decided to take this action. A bit of history is that this was not the first time that the flag has been used in 2017. Whenever some white communities in our country feel disaffected by some decisions that are made, these are especially the right-wingers, then they haul out this flag to then sort of demonstrate that they pine for that past where black people didn't have much of rights. And I think that's why we then decided to take the step. And following this judgment, we are now empowered to then can do more, together with those who opposed us, to work on people understanding their history.
Selo Hatang, thank you very much indeed for taking time to talk to us here on Focus on Africa. Thank you. Well, before we go, let's take a quick look at our top story. Sudan's new Supreme Authority, the Sovereign Council, comprised of 6 civilians and 5 uniformed officers, has been sworn into office. It will be led for the first 21 months by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who had been in charge of the outgoing military council. A civilian will then take over until elections planned for 2022. That's Focus on Africa for now. Thank you for your company.